Folks, Science and Art Club for February. Good evening to all of you. Um, it was a great day on Valentine's Day to think of love for everybody. So I want to extend the greetings to you from the Executive Committee of Science and Art and welcome you to the meeting tonight, almost the very last day in the month of February. This will be a good meeting tonight. I'm looking at about 20 pictures, images online. There are more, I'm sure. And I heard from Larry earlier today that we're expecting about 30 altogether. So I'd like to ask, first of all, if there were any members who brought guests or invited guests to be on the transmission tonight. So don't all speak at once, but put up your hand and we'll recognize you and say hi and bring on your guest. I'm looking for hands.
Susan invited me.
Okay. Yes, I know about Susan's guest as well. She gets to be last tonight. Anybody else bring guests or invited guests on tonight? Well, I see no other hands. That's part of the deal about being members of this great club is to invite members into the meetings in hopes that sometime in the near future, they might also become interested members also of Science and Art. So tonight, the host, besides the electronic hosts, I want to say thank you to the officers who helped draw this together, Ken and Linda, or Ann, I should say. I don't know if they're on tonight, but they helped put the programs together, and Ann is the membership chairperson. Bruce and Denise, thanks to you especially. Bruce is our engineer with the most knowledge and gets us going, and Denise is the person who keeps our website up and running. We're glad for that. And I see, let's see, I think Chuck and Margot are someplace on here. Chuck is our treasurer, and that amounts to our executive group that get together and plan things for our evenings together on Monday nights. Tonight, the host, that is the meeting host, is longtime member to Science and Art, Susan Bockius. And we happen to be in Susan's house tonight. She'll do the presentation also. Can't wait for this. But a few facts about Susan. Susan enjoys living in Mount Airy, Philadelphia again. This was her childhood home. Her father and grandfather had professional organizations and businesses in Mount Airy on Germantown Avenue. Susan's professional life and academic life took her, I want to say globally. You can keep asking her for those specific events, but Susan has been around and has a great memory and also does a good idea, good talks about where she's been and what has interested her. And she's so good about sharing that with the rest of us. Out of high school, Susan was a student at the Moore College of Art, Institute of Art here in Philadelphia. And she's never lost, but regained and very enthusiastically sustained her interest in art, even to the point of being a member of the Mount Airy or the Allens Lane Center for Art, not many blocks from where we're meeting tonight. Susan asked me, well, actually, she almost compelled me to say that she and I know each other from as, shall I say, long ago as high school. We are high school classmates. And Susan was the editor-in-chief for our high school yearbook. You just met Emma a while ago, which is Susan's granddaughter from Germany. And Susan told me, and Emma told me that they actually perused the high school yearbook together tonight. So they already know too much about both Susan and me. Anyway, folks, please welcome Susan. She has a very, very interesting topic for us tonight. And when she's finished, Well, we'll have our usual questions and answers and comments from you all as the visitors. So Susan, take my chair and tell us about women, witches, and brews.
Good evening, folks. David, that was a very generous introduction. My guests this evening include what? My guests include
tea.
Sorry, what? What's going on?
Somebody's logging on and leaving a mic open, leaving the unmute on.
Oh, okay. Larry is one of my guests. He just spoke. Larry Schofer used to be a neighbor, then he moved to Cathedral Village. And I still miss the opportunity to walk down and have tea with he and his wife. We have Tom and Janet Lynn Garabrandt. I know Tom from the Unitarian Society of Germantown, and I know Janet Lynn now from Northwest Village Network. Delighted to have you here. Bob Harris and Barbara Harris, also from NVN. Welcome. And let's see. I guess that's, oh, and Faye. Where's Faye? Faye Ross and Hope Punnett. Both, I know both Faye and Hope from working with them in Northwest Village. Thank you for coming this evening, folks. So I think I've covered my guests, and I guess others have done their guests. So
not quite.
I'm sorry.
I think Lewis is going to introduce Heather.
Oh, is Lewis in touch?
You're muted, Lewis. Lewis, you're muted, Lewis. Lou, you're muted.
It's okay. I think I understood what he was saying. Hi, everybody. I'm Heather. Nice to be here.
Heather's a guest of Lewis's. Anybody else pipe up? We've had a Wi-Fi problem, so we could hear but not be seen or heard. Now we're on. Anyway, thank you for Heather. Where's my other friends? Well, shame on me. Thank you, Heather, for making me not.
Thank you for having me, and I apologize to rudely interrupt. So thank you. This is great.
Oh, now my wife is finally on. That's good. She got on too for the other Wi-Fi. Good. Okay, well, we're looking forward to hearing about witches. What are your credentials? What do you know about witches, Susan? You're going to tell us that?
Yes, I'm going to tell you how this article happened. I'll start with that. This article was written in 1974 when I was employed at the Morris Arboretum. They had a quarterly magazine for members called the Morris Arboretum Bulletin. And my boss was the editor, and he was also his name was Dr. Hui Lin Lee. He was a botanist at the University of Pennsylvania and director of the Arboretum. Dr. Lee invited me to do an article for the fall issue of the bulletin. And he suggested on Herbals, that is, the books that collect the information on herbal remedies, plants and herbal remedies. I'm going to share screen. Okay, can you see? Okay, this is the article that resulted, called Women, Witches, and Herbals. As I began to read about the books that compile the information about plants, I realized there was a whole other dynamic going on. I was introduced to the female healers of ancient times and how they had developed their applications, and then how they were viewed by the Christianizing forces of early medieval Europe. I was doing research in the 1970s. Second wave feminism was all around, and I was up to my ears in it. I could see an opportunity in this subject for some historical perspective, and I asked for permission to take the article in that direction. Dr. Lee was a kind man and a supportive boss, and he said, sure, go for it. When the article appeared, Ernesta Ballard, who was the head of the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society at the time and an ongoing force behind the women's movement in Philadelphia, called Dr. Lee to comment with pleasure and surprise on the article's appearance in the Morris Arboretum Bulletin. To her, an unexpected source of this kind of historical awareness. I present the text pretty much as it appeared in the bulletin. I've added pictures because of the visual nature of this presentation. So this article for the fall edition begins. This is the season of witches, a time for the donning of tattered robes and funny black hats, in a ritual whose usual outcome is a sack full of candy. Yet those women whom we celebrate were once noble keepers of their people's trust. They were the priestesses, healers, and soothsayers in the lands of Northern Europe before the coming of Christianity. Their succeeding reputation was fashioned by a church which sought to displace their influence, discredit their abilities, and in a misogynism outlined by St. Paul, confine them to cloister and hearth. It's on the woman healer that we wish to center our attention as witch, priestess, or simple woman, a simple being an herb, a simple woman. It was she who had the earliest working knowledge of the flora of her surroundings. The early practice of medicine was inextricably bound to a knowledge of plants, for herbs and their derivatives were long people's only tool against death and suffering. To a primitive people, disease is the work of the forces of nature, not far from the truth. But in their subjectivity, those forces of nature became the acts of the gods, the visible workings of presumed beings. It is not surprising, therefore, that plants which counteracted the force of disease were seen as gifts of those same gods. The knowledge of plants, their prescription to certain diseases, and the actual gathering and administration were functions of the priesthood, with whom lay the interpretation of divine will and the rites of placation and expiation. Those who understood natural laws, in which range falls the action of drugs and disease, were thought to partake of the knowledge of the gods, to have a special window onto the universe. Thus, the woman healers of the peoples of Northern Europe were also priestesses, a role which brought them into direct conflict with the Christian church. The church issued frequent bans on the healing arts. Its official position was that disease was a trial to be endured for the edification of the soul, or a punishment for wrongdoing to be expiated by prayer and penance. It wasn't until the establishment of universities in the 12th century that there developed a system of medical practices that were hierarchically condoned, that is, by the church. The university and the burgeoning medical enclave were proscribed areas. They exercised control over what were good and bad medical practices and who were good and bad practitioners. Women were outlawed, even those who practiced medicine according to the current tenets of the profession. In 1322, Jacoba Felice was tried by the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Paris. She was not found deficient in her practice of medicine. Her patients, in fact, claimed her skill. She was found guilty of being a woman practicing medicine. And Madame Felice is but one example of many of the centuries-old struggle between Christian and pagan, male and female authority. The renown of the woman healers of Northern Europe stretches far back in time. Tacitus mentions the esteemed reputation of the German women. History records the facility of the Druid prophetesses. The Scandinavian women's skill in the making of potions was even higher in acclaim than that of the Germans, and the Scandinavians erected statues to their best women healers. In such a martial society as these were, the women healers' skill in setting fractures, righting dislocation, and healing the wounds of battle were socially vital qualities. Women also treated the all-important matters of reproduction. Fertility, childbirth, and gynecological ailments all fell within their domain. Women were also charged with the veterinary care of the tribal cattle and their milk production. Women's influence was also thought to extend to the more amorphous areas of crop production and control of the weather. It's interesting to note, and hardly accidental in occurrence, that when the female healer priestess fell into disrepute, these areas were the ones most often charged to witches' evil intervention. For weather, crop failure, the falling off of milk production by the local herds, infertility, impotency, difficulty in childbearing, and the birth of deformed children. Centuries preceded the church's confident displacement of local customs and beliefs. Some authorities maintained that the old religion, capital O, capital R, continued in active practice until as late as the 16th century. See Margaret Mary's The God of the Witches. During these centuries, for the sake of this article, I have used the 12th through the 6th through the 12th centuries. The church's position toward the local peoples was one of conciliation, compromise, and appropriation. Church doctrine was liberally interpreted to increase its local relevance. The heroes of the local pantheon were given a thin Christian veneer and shuttled into sainthood. Think Bridget of Ireland and Saint Bridget of Kildare. Church holidays were arranged to appropriate the activities of local festivals. The church's position toward the female priestess healer followed similar policy lines. Local goddesses with healing attributes were appropriated into the worship of the Virgin Mary or individually elevated to sainthood. The days of herb gathering for medicinal purposes were sandwiched into the church calendar with appropriate saintly headings. Curing practices were moved into convent and monastery. Contemporary female religious authorities were absorbed into the powerful and newly created role of abbess. The church's position toward female priestess healer followed similar policy lines. Newly created role of abbess, sorry. The abbess proved particularly troublesome. The church had no genuine place for a, quote, female priest, unquote. Mediation between the human and divine was always viewed as an exclusive male prerogative, and sacerdotal privilege was only rested for brief periods of time in the relative chaos of the political state. It was always called back with severe warnings and injunctions by the male authorities. Yet these abbesses achieved much while they still believed themselves independent powerful, and gifted with purpose. And often the church/pagan interface produced a neither fish nor fowl result, a vague combination of characteristics in which old traditions still reverberated. The Harvest Festival was a most important event to the agricultural peoples of Northern Europe. Halloween and the supposed power of witches at this time is a survival of old religious celebrations. For the female medic, it was a time to harvest herbs for the coming year. In Germany, the festival of the Assumption of the Virgin was deliberately correlated with the harvest celebrations to sanctify them, according to Pope Sergius, whose dates were 650 to 701. Lena Eckenstein, in her book, Woman Under Monasticism, quotes contemporary, for her, that was 1896, practices, which still bore the influence of the ancient priestess healer traditions. This is quoting Lena Eckenstein. In Bavaria, the harvest festival sometimes goes by the name of the, quote, Day of Sacred Herbs, unquote. Near Würzburg, it's called the, quote, Day of Sacred Roots, or, unquote, or, quote, Day of Bunch Gathering, unquote. In the Tyrol, the 15th of August is the great day of the Virgin, when a collection of herbs for medicinal purposes is made. A number of days come in July and August and are now connected with the Virgin, on which herbs are collected and offered as sacred bunches, either on the altar of Our Lady in church or chapel, or on hilltops, which throughout Germany are the sites of ancient woman worship. End of Lena Eckenstein's quote. Saint Walpurga had a particular influence. Legend tells us that Saint Walpurga was a niece of Saint Boniface, the great apostle to Germany, and came with him to Germany in 728. She is sometimes said to have been the abbess of Heidenheim, a site located between Munich and Nuremberg. Says Anna Jameson in her Legends of the Monastic Orders, quote, like many religious women of that time, Walpurga had studied medicine for the purpose of ministering to the poor. The cures which she performed were laid by the people solely to the power of her prayers, unquote. Legend goes on to tell us that at her death, she was laid to rest beneath a rock. From that rock issued an oil whose curative powers were greatly praised. Lena Eckenstein has already told us that of the places that were sites of women worship, and to that she adds rocks, fountains, trees, and mountaintops. This legend of Walpurga may be an appropriation of the renown of a local priestess healer, or an exaggeration of the healing role of this early female religious. Whichever it be, the legend continues and the paradoxes increase. Walpurgisnacht bears the name of this saint healer. For those unfamiliar with the tradition, the night of April 30th was the time when the power of witches was believed to be at its height. The first scene of Goethe's Faust takes place on this eve. On the night of Walpurga, witches were said to assemble at crossroads and mountaintops, where they indulged in orgies, reaffirmed their allegiance to the devil, a goat. There is a goat pictured in this image. Initiated new members and received their assignments for the coming year. Blocksberg, the highest peak of the Harz Mountains, was said to be the central site of these gatherings. These celebrations were likely the survival of pagan fertility cults. The 1st of May signaled the beginning of the growing season. As such, it was an extremely important day to the German cultivators. Contracts were made, labors of the field were planned, the good graces of nature were sought. The location, Blocksberg, figures heavily in ancient rites of sacrifice and woman worship. Walpurga was said to have died on the 25th of February, yet we find her influence transported to a time when the sway of the old religion would have been most potent. Her power, stemming as it did from an older orthodoxy, may have been set up as guardian against the forces of the old religion, the church's offering of a legitimized yet kindred authority. Church's officials found herbal curing arts a troublesome matter, encumbered as they were with the baggage of local beliefs and ritual. Yet despite intermittent papal bans, the herbal garden and infirmary became part of most cloisters. Many early female saints were credited with miraculous cures, as we have seen in the case of Walpurga, but the high esteem of the convent healer also had a basis in sound practice. Convent hospices treated all who asked. Patients received healthful food and pure water. The lodgings were clean, the atmosphere restful. All in all, a very salutary environment. Combined with herbal ministrations, these factors could account for many a miraculous cure. Of the powerful abbesses of those early Christian days, much can be said. They relegated to themselves a religious authority, unprecedented in church history. We can only assume that their expectations were based on traditions outside the Christian order, for their actions certainly did not bring them church approval. They held broad sway of the local populations. To judge from the frequent interdictions, they often took the administration of sacraments upon themselves. They, quote, interfered, unquote, in the politics of the local bishoprics, and more than once led armed revolts when decisions went against what they deemed just. Among them were some of the most talented writers of their day, and among their number was a woman whose contribution to the history of herbal knowledge was truly unique. Saint Hildegard of Bingen was a powerful abbess with devoted followings in both the church and lay populations. She was a visionary and wrote books of prophecy and revelation. She composed music and song, some still performed today, and she wrote drama, a very unusual literary undertaking for the time. She compiled works on healing that have been in use for a millennium. In Hildegard's early years, before becoming the head of her own convent in 1146 AD, she tended the sick in the infirmary of the convent of Diese-Bodenberg. Out of this experience, she wrote 2 books on medicine. The first, Liber Simplicis Medicinae, the second, Liber Compositae Medicinae. The former became a widely used materia medica. Liber Simplicis Medicinae set forth the simple natural sources for medical treatment to be found in food and herbs. It lists the merits of 213 varieties of plants, as well as 55 trees used in the treatment of disease. It enumerates 26 different precious stones used to make medicines. In encyclopedic fashion, the book also includes 68 varieties of birds, 43 species of animals, 18 reptiles, and 37 varieties of fish. Her work is the first to properly classify the whale as a mammal. How did she know? In her discussion of metals, Hildegard quite properly notes the poisonous effect of lead and brass and the tonic effect of copper and iron. Liber Simplicis Medicinae was an exceptional contribution to herbal knowledge in that it was the first materia medica of indigenous plants. Other herbals were based on Greek and Byzantine texts, their plants often exotic to the European practitioner. Also, Hildegard's work was, to our best knowledge, independent of all other authorities, except her working knowledge. It's an excellent example of the popular medical arts of the time and a reflection of Hildegard's studious approach. Hildegard's contributions to herbal knowledge were significant, but there were other sources. One herbal which we can conjecture was in the hands of the lay population was the herbarium of Apuleius Platonicus. This small but popular recipe book of medicinal cures is believed to have originated in 5th century Greece. The work was copied for centuries and its illustrations reduced to the simplification you see here. A peculiarity of this book is that for herbs credited with healing a bite or sting, the creature of infliction is featured with the plant of cure. This form of visual notation, in which the book abounds, made its information accessible to those who could not read. As such, it may have been a resource for the local healer. The simple women of ancient days were consulted by herbal compilers in later centuries, touched with the Renaissance spirit of inquiry and objectivity. In a departure from the slavish copying of Greek and Byzantine text, these herbalists turned their eyes to local flora and sought to be exhaustive in listing plants and their medicinal action. Here are some examples. Simon Cordo of Genoa, in the 13th century compilation Synonyma Medicinae, was not content to pore over books. This is a quote. He had gone botanizing with an old wife of Crete to learn not only the Greek names of herbs, but also their virtues. Rufinus, who I couldn't find a picture and even a representation of, in his 13th century herbal, Let's Speak All Who Had a Firsthand Knowledge of Plants, among the tales of hunters, fishermen, and artists, we find stories of the prescriptions and treatments of the women of Salerno. The 16th century physician and philosopher Paracelsus was the son of a physician. To the education provided by his father, Paracelsus added 7 years of travel to major cultural centers in Europe and Northern Africa to explore and record the knowledge of local practitioners. We know that the powerful native narcotics, belladonna, henbane, and species of datura formed part of the ancient pharmacopoeia. These narcotics can produce death, but administered in proper dosage and by local healers, these drugs would have afforded patients rest, sleep, and relief from pain. In larger dosages, their hallucinogenic effects may have had a religious significance. Cultures which utilize indigenous hallucinogens often connect the altered states of consciousness they produce with religious experiences. The content of such hallucinations usually follows culturally formed expectations. Margaret B. Krieg, in her book, Green Medicine, The Search for Plants That Heal, reports a contemporary experiment. This is a quote. Recently, a German professor, Dr. Will Erik Pückert of Göttingen, mixed an unguent of belladonna, henbane, and datura from a 17th century formula and rubbed it on his forehead and armpits and had colleagues do the same. They fell into a 24-hour sleep in which they dreamed of wild rides, frenzied dancing, and other weird adventures of the type connected with medieval orgies. A pharmacological explanation for these sensations: irregular heart action when one is falling asleep produces this feeling of dropping through space. When combined with drugs which enhance this irregularity and also cause delirium, one might well believe it's possible to fly like a witch on a broomstick. End of quote. That concludes the text of my article. These are a few thoughts in reflection. I'm pleased to say that in the 50 years, 50 years, since this was written, some things have changed. Women have a wide range of career choice, including in the medical community, though I believe many would agree that we must remain watchful guardians of rights so hard won. Hildegard of Bingen has finally gotten her due. After 833 years, she's been honored as both a saint and a doctor of the church by the Roman Catholic establishment to which she so restlessly belonged. She has also been named founder of scientific natural history by the German academic community. Remember her correct classification of the whale? That may be part of it. Hildegard's book on herbal remedies remains in print and is available on Amazon. Some things really are timeless. I found interests in researching this article that have kept me company like good friends for a lifetime. Women's studies, medieval history, religion, and the arts. This has been a pleasure revisiting these old friends. Thank you for this opportunity. Any questions?
Yes. Susan, thank you so much. So, do we get Hildegard of Bingen? Is that where we get binging from? Origin of
No.
binging?
Bingen is a town on the Rhine, not too far from Frankfurt.
I thought I had it. Thank you.
Good idea, though. Okay. Thank you, folks. I'm going to turn this back to David.
So, David,
I'm here now with my glasses on. I can hear better.
so David,
Hi.
David,
I
so
can't.
your clerical status is not jeopardized by hanging out with her?
Thank you for putting me on the warm spot. No, my clerical status is not affected, nor is it in danger at all. It has interested me over the years to begin with, even before I met back up with Susan some years ago now. As Susan so well documented for the past several minutes for us, that the female gender has been pushed aside professionally, not just among medicine, but also the clergy. We all know that. It was just refreshing for me to listen to the real hard specifics. I read Susan's paper probably 2 years ago when she first of all gave it to me electronically. I was fascinated by it. And I know I said, you need to be the presenter and the lecturer for us sometime in science and art. Well, tonight we got Susan along with the nice topic, a very interesting topic. I'll bet some more of you have had a couple minutes now to think of some comments or questions you'd like to direct to Susan. I see a couple hands going up already.
Especially since Lewis lowered the bar.
Yeah, no, Lewis, no, my dear man, you're always good about raising the bar, no matter how low it gets. I see some hands going up, and I'm not quite sure who it is because names are not attached to it.
Put your finger on that.
Well, I'm Loretta and I have a question. May I
Yes,
ask?
yes. Now I see you in good. I'm going to put Susan back in front of the camera because I'm not going to field all the questions. Let that up to Susan so we can use more of the time that way. Loretta, you're first.
Thank you.
Hi,
Susan,
Loretta.
this was marvelous. Thank you so much.
Thank
Now,
you.
my question to you is, how do you relate the the women, the very smart, independent, wonderful women, healing women of the Middle Ages with what happened in New England in this country early on?
Well, in some ways, first of all, the old religion, so to speak, some would say there's still strains of it around, but this is, I have heard people say that the women who were treated as witches were women who were tended to live by themselves, tended to have independent incomes. They might have land that people wanted to buy, that sometimes the damnation that was going on had a selfish end for those doing it. But why a group of people like a village like Salem would conceive of evil in a group of women over time, I can't say I understand, but Larry does.
No, I don't understand, but I want to throw in that the witch craze is not confined to New England. England and Scotland had plenty of examples of execution of witches. And we, of course, we remember Joan of Arc, who was burned as a witch. So there are these cases. And it's also interesting that there aren't very many men witches. I mean, there's part of this tradition in Christianity and in Western and in European society of an anti-female feeling. There's something wrong with women who stand out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Susan.
Yes.
I think even today, there's the misogyny that says women are just too smart, too independent, too out there, get down.
Yes. And they could, it was an era in which they could convince people that these women had powers to work the forces of nature against people.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people believe that kind of stuff these days.
I have a question, Susan.
Yes.
Back when you showed some of those wonderful old prints, how did the goat get to have such a central role in this idea of witchcraft? How did the goat get so notoriously connected with them? There is a book called The Horned God, where an author has researched the very common occurrence of the local principal deity in these nature-centered religions around Northern Europe was a horned creature. And why that, I can't tell you, but
it was quite common. It was the understood manifestation of the former head god, which then under Christianity became the symbol of the devil. The horned god became the symbol of the devil, just as the woman healer became a witch, because they were counter to the religion and culture that they were trying to introduce.
We still have it in our society. We talk about an old goat. We have that image.
You're not thinking of Tom Brady, right?
Say that. Up top. Top left.
GOAT has come to be known as greatest of all time. So when they talk about Tom Brady being a goat, it doesn't mean, well, actually, he does seem to have quite a strong attraction to women.
Barbara Harris.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's all tied in with the idea that women are expendable right from the beginning. You know, women's lives were so looked down upon. It was like a scapegoat. Anything went wrong must be a woman's fault. I don't know if that's true, but it would fit.
Well, yes, I think there was a lot of misogynism expressed toward women in these patterns. Yes.
Susan, do you know how the Native American cultures, I know that they used a lot of herbal medicines in their healing. And do you know how what role the women played in that? Was there a transference from the European to the native cultures, or did the native cultures precede that and so therefore develop on their own?
I honestly don't know, Bob, but if I were going to do an update, that would be an interesting area to look into. I do know that the tribal societies, the woodland societies of the East Coast, for instance, I believe were matrilineal.
Mm-hmm.
The Plains Indians, I think, it was different. But I don't know much about our Native American culture, and I think that's I would enjoy knowing that. Or maybe one of the people here knows something about Native American culture they can share with us and their role of women. Lita. Oh,
The green riveter.
this?
Yeah. That person.
Mr. Robinson? Robert Robinson?
Yes, I just joined you. Sorry about that. My grandchildren came from out of town and they popped over to visit me, and I couldn't say I got to go.
I see.
Sorry about
Okay.
that. Sorry about coming in late, but I just wanted to tell you I appreciated the opportunity, and I'll listen to the balance of this.
Okay. Hope, did you have a question? Comment? Your speaker isn't on. Hope, your speaker isn't on.
Okay, I'm on now. No, you just wonder how many people died before somebody found out whether something was poisonous or not. How? I mean, Datura, for example, is a plant that I have worked with, and I know its pharmacologic capabilities, but you just wonder. The same with mushrooms. How did people figure out which ones were all right to eat and which ones weren't? We have no way of really knowing that, but it's intriguing.
Hope, when you say you worked with Datura, do you want to tell us what you did with Datura?
Oh, it was an undergraduate honors project. And it had to do with the speciation of the, there are about a dozen different forms of Datura and within a species, and it had to do with chromosome numbers and things that we really didn't know very much about in those days.
I see. You were further describing it in new technical ways.
Well, a little bit, yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. It was fascinating.
Reed?
Hi, I have a question about ergot, which it affected grain and how this might, how you might address this about witches.
Well, is Reed your first name? Reed, welcome. I have read, Reed, that ergot affected the grain stores, and that when it's consumed, it leads to a kind of delirium or
Hallucinations?
Hallucinations. And in fact, it was found rather consistently found in places that had experienced these coming together of people in, I wouldn't say, I don't know about orgies, but dances or altered states. And that they didn't know about ergot, but they attributed it to the activity of witchcraft.
I heard something on PBS years ago that this was found in poor areas that had poor drainage, and it got into the grains of certain people in areas in France and other areas where people were tried and killed because of their behavior. And it related, like in the bakeries, people would bring their bread to a bakery to get cooked, and they didn't know where it came from.
Wow. Yes. Well, I'm glad we know it now, huh? Thank you.
By the way, Reed is a friend of ours who was a member of Science and Arts and brought us into the Science and Arts more than 20 years ago, and probably started at least 30 years ago originally, right?
30.
Yeah. And she's only 35, so it's amazing.
Same here. Catherine and I were brought in by Reed at that time.
Really?
Also.
Gosh,
So I have a more meaty question, Susan.
yes, Louis.
I've got 3 granddaughters, 2 of them young enough to influence. Was there a training program to be a witch or an abbess? Were abbesses, young abbesses, groomed to take on the robes and learn how to do that? Was there a career path? Go into tech transfer.
They were trained. There was within the convent, there were various kinds of activities, and you couldn't be, I don't know, maybe I'm thinking of Cadfall now, if you're familiar with the PBS series or the BritBox series on the monk. But you had to have training in order to know what the herbs were, how to prepare them, what kind of dosage was relevant. And yes, this happened within the convent hierarchy. Or I guess with the local healer too, she was training apprentices.
I was thinking about how to actually have access to power. Like, how do I spoil your crops? How do I make your cow give sour milk? There must be some intellectual property there that we can
Louis, this is Ken. If you were looking for getting some information for your grandchildren about herbs and herbalists, there's actually a course that's going to study or start in the next 2 weeks. And I don't have the particular information, but if you go online to Puffin, it's the Philadelphia Urban Farmer Network, they'll give you that information. They're signing people up for it now. But with the interest of Susan's program today, I thought, and thinking of other programming for future, that it may be interesting to bring on some of the modern day herbalists in the Philadelphia area, and there are lots of them. They're collecting herbs all over the city, all over the communities, and producing things that go back, over 1,000 years, and still having remedies for lots of different ailments. So if that does seem like something that you would like to hear more about, some modern day, and it happens that most of the herbalists are women, at least the ones I've met, and we can research them through Puffin, and I'm sure we can get someone to speak. I would need a host, though, someone who would want to volunteer to provide a facility at a place, and I can make the connection through Puffin to perhaps get an herbalist to talk to us, if that sounds of interest for the future.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Larry's got his hand up.
Yeah, going back to the question of did people in the New World learn this from the Old World or reverse? I remember being a tourist in the jungle along the Amazon, Peru, and one of our stops was a shaman, but it's a woman who is also an herbalist who, it's her role in the society. She obviously has not learned it from Europe. I mean, this is native to the area. In addition to knowing herbs, she also is seen as someone who blesses people. I got my blessing. I'm not sure how much good it did me, but I got my blessing there. That is to say, I think that lots of societies, which we call, quote, primitive, meaning pre-industrial, really, develop their own traditions. They learn about herbs. They don't need Europeans to teach them that. And the last thing is that, lots of herbs are now studied in labs. So, which now drug companies want to find the plant and then they want to synthesize it.
Yes.
But that's sort of the modern tradition of herbalism.
Yes. Yes. And in fact, well, I mentioned that some of the Renaissance figures did travel and interview people, go talk to people in the field in a different region to find out what they knew. Well, I also know that in 1950s, we had a family friend who was working at Smith Kline and French, and Smith Kline was sending people out into the backwoods, to tribal areas, to unlooked at remedies to see whether they were valid. Faye, did you have your hand up?
No, sorry.
Anybody else
Oh.
lit up?
Here we go. Heather.
Hi, Susan. Thank you for an incredible presentation. It was very inspirational, so thank you. I do have a question. So when we think about the role of a woman being in power, being able to move nature and harness the power of herbal remedies, but equating that to being evil, I'm curious, when did the concept of the caretaking role of a woman, such as a nurse, did those concepts exist at the same time? Or was this all carrying nurse concept and caregiver and physician and the role a woman plays in helping health? Where did that come from? Did that exist at the same time and then one concept won? Or did it evolve over time? Because I know if I want to be taken care of, I want to go to a woman.
Well, the women tended to be the caretakers, whether under the Christian church or within the local groups. But how their actions were seen could shift depending on who was looking. I mean, when the church was looking at the native, the local healers, they were suspicious of them. They were not within the realm of knowledge of this hierarchical society, and they when they had reason for their suspicions to turn, sometimes they turned, and it became an evil influence. I think it had to do with the cultural shifts that were going on.
If I can throw my comment in here, I think that's an interesting question, Heather. But I think that the key is that women could have been really in charge of understanding what herbs around, what nature around were able to help people when they were in physical trouble of some sort. But when the woman became too powerful because of that, that's when, oh my God, that woman is the devil. You know, that, you know, no man wanted to have that power outsize their own. And that's, I think, where it probably happened.
That's fascinating.
How about the non-herbal, non-medicinal side of it, where a woman could stick pins in a little doll she made of me and give me very bad pains in my joints?
Yeah, be careful, Louis.
How do you know it was a woman who did that?
Right.
Were they called witches? Were the practitioners of voodoo, for example, were they considered witches? Was that a subclass of witches and wizards?
Well, I don't think that's only a female thing, is it?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, aren't there male witches? Are there not male witches?
Yes, there are.
Aren't they warlocks?
And I'm not trying to be woke. I just mean, I thought I heard there were male witches.
David is volunteering here. The name warlocks are male witches. Yeah. Yes, and they were probably respected leaders in their communities before they came in contact with the disapproving power structure.
Yeah.
And warlock sounds more powerful than witch. So.
And just think, nurses are wonderful and caring and nurturing, and they make a whole lot less than doctors.
Yeah.
We'll point out, however, that currently medical schools are more than 50% attended by women, more so than men.
Correct.
So schools are picking up.
Yes, and I think David might be able to comment on figures about, I belong to the Unitarian Church, and I know that slightly greater than 50% of the clerical candidates for Unitarianism are female. I don't know about the Lutheran Church, David.
It got to be about 50% about 15 years ago. Can you hear me okay? I'm sitting back one notch in the
Yes.
in the room here. Yeah, I can only reflect for the, how shall we say it, the Lutheran side of things. Not that I was in administration to know, but I just sort of kept my ears to this. It is 50 years since Lutherans in this country, and I have to keep emphasizing this country, extended the invitation, and I guess I'll say the rights for ordination to the female in 1971. That's a date that sort of hangs as a marker. But since then, I know in our seminaries in this country, I have to keep emphasizing just this country, it reached about 50% of those preparing either to be deacon or pastor in our seminaries got to be 50%.
Female.
Female, yes, half and half. What I know about the class entering the campus, well, United Lutheran Seminary, and I live on the Philadelphia campus. The entering class this year is just slightly over 50% of females. I didn't bother to look up what the actual facts are, but it's just a matter of talking to those who are in the enrollment office, at least of our branch of the seminary. If that helps to the discussion, thanks. It is now 20 to 9. The questions and the comments from all of you have been just so great. I want to ask Ken if he will just momentarily tell us what's in store for us next month in March. This will be both a an in-person meeting and also a Zoom meeting. So Ken, I can't find you on the
Oh, I'm here though.
oh, there you are. I see you. Okay, Ken, please comment.
Yes, George McNeely is a new member, but someone who did present to our group once before, and he will be talking to us. He's a historian and has some connection with the library in Chestnut Hill, among other things. But he is a very interesting speaker that I'm sure we're going to really enjoy. He has decided to talk to us about the evolution of what is now our Independence Hall and Carpenter Hall architecturally, how it has changed since over the last 250 years. So he's going to go through the process and show the whys and wherefores from an architectural standpoint. So it'd be a historical architectural course, and just not sure where that's. Oh, I think it will be at the in-person will be at Albury Arboretum at the Cope House. So we'll get that information out. And let me say right now, Lawrence, thank you so much for all you've done, getting the word out and keeping people informed and making sure that everybody knows about our meetings. So thank you again, Lawrence, for all of this. You're doing a great job. And so that and then the April, I'll just speak quickly about that. The another new member is going to talk to us about sex.
Oh, good.
Oh,
And that's how he presented it, and he's starting to give me some more notes so I can read up on this thing. But it's he'll believe he'll be talking to us as a scientist. So it should be enjoyable. And he's a professor of physics, I believe. And but anyway, he'll be that will be that topic. Now in May.
Is that G-rated, Ken?
I'm sorry?
Is that G-rated?
G-rated? Do you have a clause in your contract with
I don't know. I just want to make sure the cat's not
Zoom?
moving.
Yeah.
We all want to read up on that, Ken.
Oh,
So you share reading with us, right?
So, at any rate, I was going to say in May, we actually had someone for March who had to cancel, and we were able to shift some of the people around. So I am looking for a host, at least a host, and perhaps a host and speaker. So from the organization, if you folks have any ideas or would like to host at this point, I've been talking to some other folks about some other ideas for other programming. And so if somebody wants to host, but doesn't want to present, please get in touch with me, and we'll talk about it and try to get you rescheduled for, if not May, for next October when we go back, when we come back after our summer break.
Ken, thank you very much. Thanks for the heads up.
Bruce, will there be the recorded will the record of this be on the website, the Science and Art website?
Well, Lawrence is posting them to YouTube channel that we have, I believe, right, Lawrence?
Yeah, so I hope everybody knows by now that we have our own YouTube channel for the Science and Art Club of Germantown. So far, I think there are 2 recordings.
No.
I'm hoping that we can find one for the first presentation this year, which was Denise Wash's. But the one that we just saw by Susan Bockius will be up there in a day or so.
Thank you. There were a couple of people who couldn't make it tonight who asked if there would be a recording. Thank you. And I saw Bruce turn the recording thing on. So
Yep.
Thank you. This is progress. We have our own YouTube channel. Wow. Yay.
Yes.
Lawrence, you were going to be my last and final thank you for the evening. As secretary of the Science and Art Club, you've done a good job keeping us in the know as far as the plans for the meeting, the times and the dates, and especially the links we need to tune in, and especially for tonight.
Well, you're welcome. I could not have done it without Denise Wash looking over my shoulder.
Yes. Those who know how all this works put it together, and I'm very appreciative of that. Folks, it's 8:45. I think we're all set to sign off for the evening. It's been a wonderful evening together once again. I want to bid you farewell from the officers, and thank also Susan yet once again for being host.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. Very interesting.
Yeah, and Bruce for doing the Zoom.
Thank
Ben
you.
gives it to me for free. Heather, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is wonderful. It's nice to meet everybody.
See you all.
Yes. Thank you, Hope.